In yesterday's episode, we saw the cruelty of these Pitt raiders on full display as they murdered and beat slaves inside the mill. We were chosen to go into the Steelyard to collect 10 steel ingots. This task is seen as a suicide mission because the Steelyard is swarming with Trogs and wild men. In today's episode, we venture bravely into the Steelyard to complete this task and maintain our cover. The first few steel ingots are very easy to find. We find them lying next to the body of a Pitt slave. We also find an assault rifle. If we completely explore the Steelyard, we'll walk away with enough weapons, ammunition, chems, and armor to fully equip ourselves in preparation for the trials ahead. We find many dead bodies, some of whom are wearing some of the best armor we can walk away with here in the pit, and we find 2 unique weapons. Not long after leaving the door to the mill, we see our first Trog. Looking through a fence, we see some Trogs walking around near some nuclear barrels. Continuing forward, we can take in the sheer magnitude of this Steelyard. We see the blast furnace towering above us off in the distance, and smoke from the smokestacks blanketing the entire area. The Steelyard is easily the largest place to explore in the pit, and aside from the Capital Wasteland, likely the largest zone in the game. After venturing a little further, we find a heartbreaking scene.
Millie! It's me! Your brother, John. You remember me, don't you, Billy? Billy? Oh, Billy! Billy! My poor brother!
If we choose not to intervene like we just did, Billy will kill his brother. We remember from talking with Medea and Werner that the Trogs are just horribly mutated human beings. After years of exposure to the radiation and unique concoction of toxic mutagens produced by the metalworking going on here in the pit, that people will break out in lesions all over their body, eventually go insane and turn into wild men, and after enough exposure, degenerate into mindless Trogs like the ones we just killed. Since the Steelyard is so sprawling, it's very easy to get turned around, but the place does break down into logical segments. Here's an aerial shot of the place we're exploring now. Near the top of the screen is the door to the mill. This is the door we just came out of. This is on the eastern side of the Steelyard. Rounding a corner going north, we find a door to the supply plant. This is where we find a unique weapon. Right next to the train yard. The train yard is small, but there are many cars still here in the train yard, and the rooftops of each are connected by a lot of ramps. Here we will find Trogs scurrying around, and we can collect many steel ingots. In the furthest northern corner, we find a manhole leading to the power plant. We don't have access to this right now, but it plays a pivotal role in the story later on. Turning around, we find a rooftop maze. You see a big pile of steel ingots sitting on a platform to the left. We have to climb up ladders and crawl across rooftops to reach many of the places within the Steelyard. This will eventually lead us to a series of pipes over to the north, which crisscross throughout the Steelyard, gaining us access to more rooftops. Ultimately, this leads to the blast furnace, the highest point in the Steelyard, where we find a high concentration of wild men and Trogs. Now, in order to complete this quest, we only need to collect 10 steel ingots. However, there are 100 ingots scattered around the Steelyard, which we can turn into the foreman for additional loot. There are some unique items in this DLC that we can only get by turning in these ingots, including a full suit of tribal power armor, which is the ultimate reward. We don't get it unless we get all 100 ingots. Now, this video would get tedious and unnecessarily long if I showed you the location of every single ingot. It also wouldn't be very helpful. So instead, I'm going to link to a document in the description of this video which describes where you can find every single ingot. However, I managed to find every ingot without reading this guide because all you have to do is completely explore the Steelyard. You find these ingots inside trash cans, near to ammunition boxes and dead bodies where you can rearm, on scaffolding connecting many of the rooftops, on shelves that you can only reach via rooftops. Just turn this place over with a fine-toothed comb and you're likely going to find every one. We're going to go over the unique loot that we can get by turning in these ingots in a dedicated video at the end of this series. Once we find the 10th ingot, we get a notification telling us that we get a new perk called Auto Expert. Surviving the Steelyard has taught you something about life in the pit. You will now do extra damage with the signature weapon of the slavers, the Auto Axe. This perk grants us 25% more damage when using an auto axe or any variant of the auto axe. After buzzing through a slew of trogs and wildmen, we find a staircase that starts our ascent up towards the blast furnace. At the bottom of this staircase, we find the body of Wild Bill. This is Millie's Wild Bill. She was the woman with the pink hair who took us aside in yesterday's episode and asked us to find her friend. He didn't make it. On his body, we find a note from Wild Bill and the unique weapon, Wild Bill's sidearm. I'm not gonna make it. Millie, I'm sorry. I know everyone thought I could do it, but they don't know what's out here. It's not just the Trogs, but others, the Wild Men. Kind of funny considering my nickname, Wild Bill, back at the mill. Finding the ingots wasn't the hard part. They're everywhere. The problem was trying to make my way back to the mill. My trusty sidearm came in handy more than once, but I soon found myself in more trouble than I could handle. The gunfire alerted the wild men, and I assume it's only a matter of time before they find me. I'm sorry for letting everyone down at the mill. Let everyone know I tried my hardest. Bye. Wild Bill's sidearm is the best .32 caliber pistol in the game and has a number of features that makes it a viable weapon even compared to more powerful revolvers. It fires incredibly fast outside of VATS, making it a great little weapon for players who don't want to depend upon VATS. It does 4 more damage than a traditional .32 caliber pistol, with 10 damage bringing the weapon up to a DPS of 30. Now that we've found his body, we're going to have to give Millie the sad news. Almost immediately after finding his corpse, we get attacked by wild men, likely the very same wild men who did in Wild Bill. The most useful weapon that dropped here, as far as I'm concerned, was the automatic rifle. So many of them dropped that I was able to get this up to 100 condition, and it used a pretty common ammunition, making taking out these wildmen and trogs much easier. As we climb up towards the blast furnace, it starts to get darker. While we battle our way up here, I want to play some of the unique radio signals that appear on Pitt Radio. We gain access to this new radio broadcast immediately upon arriving in Pittsburgh, but the broadcast doesn't last forever. There are moments in the game when the broadcast will cease, and there are some places where we can't hear it. But to truly understand Lord Asher, the overlord of the Pit, we need to listen to his Orwellian broadcasts over the Pitt Radio.
Work for the good of one's fellow man is a blessing. Through labor, we shall all thrive. Let the ruling classes of the wasteland tremble at our new industrial revolution. From nothing I have brought you this settlement. From chaos the pit thrives. We all work to make it thrive further. Nothing is impossible through the sweat of our brow. Outside the pit, the world lies in ruins and survivors scratch in the dirt without dreams. But in the pit, we can live and rebuild with purpose. Great deeds require great work. We are rebuilding a glorious city and restoring the world. We must all work for this greatness. You build the weapons to arm the soldiers. Soldiers use weapons to keep you safe and bring back food. We depend on each other. What is genuine is proved in the fire. What is false we shall not miss in our ranks. remember it well, my friends. Work is what separates man from beast. It is how we change our world. It raises us above the Trogs. Work is what makes us human. Let no man call you slaves, nor any man call themselves your owners. We are all workers, whether it be in the mills, the alleys, or the war zones. A reminder, work is rewarded, sloth is punished. Such is the way we thrive in this hellish place. We all work, some in the mill, making weapons, some in the alleys defending the city, some in the wasteland raiding for our food. But we all work. The world turned against man because we were lazy and wasteful. Now, we must earn our home once again through work. You're not collared beasts of burden. You are proud workers, building a home in the world. Work shall set us all free.
At the top of the blast furnace, we find the largest stack of steel ingots in the Steelyard and 2 first aid kits filled with chems. We also get the most breathtaking view of the pit. All around us, we see the absolute devastation of the nuclear holocaust from 2077. By the time I fought my way up here, it was night, but I want to show you what the skyline looks like during the day. Now, I use a filter to change the look of my game. This filter, or ENB preset, adds many improvements to the look of Fallout 3, particularly when it comes to contrast issues. But I want to show you how the skyline looks when I have the ENB preset turned off. Here it is turned off. This is what the pit looks like without any mods installed. The devastation is impressive. We're surrounded by many completely broken and partially collapsed skyscrapers, but we can still identify a few unique buildings from the Pittsburgh skyline. One of the most prominent is going to be 1 PPG Place, which was built in 1983. Even in Fallout 3, it still has the distinctive horns on each corner of the tower. Next to it is likely 5th Avenue Place, which was built in 1988. There are a few other buildings in the Pittsburgh skyline which are similar, but this one most closely resembles 5th Avenue. This next one was tricky. It doesn't look very remarkable, but the skyscraper that this one most closely resembles is 1 Oxford Center, which was built in 1983. And the final one I could pinpoint is the tallest building in the Pitt skyline. Far off in the distance, we see the U.S. Steel Tower, which was built in 1970. In our world, the U.S. Steel Tower is the tallest building in Pittsburgh, and it looks like the same is true in the Fallout universe. We see many more buildings, but most of them are copies of each other, and some are far too destroyed to identify. Now that we've taken in the view, I'm going to turn my ENB back on, which I think brings out more detail. We now need to head back down to the train yard to explore the supply plant. There is what I think was supposed to be a big coal or slag lift leading to the blast furnace. We can use this to go all the way down where we find another big stack of steel ingots. From here we can jump back down onto some of the roofs and walk back towards the train yard. After mowing through some Trogs, we find a terminal next to a bunch of Protectron charging stations right next to the door to the supply plant. Hacking into this terminal, we can release 4 construction Protectrons, which make quick work of any remaining Trogs. It's probably a better idea to activate these guys first upon entering the Steelyard to make our lives a little easier, especially if we're a lower level. When done, we can go through the door to the supply plant. We find a destroyed Protectron on the ground, right next to a door that has a turret control terminal. After hacking it, we can turn on the turret, and it'll then start to destroy some Trogs which are in the next room. But the Trogs and Wildmen come out running, so we need to be prepared to take them out.
I don't want to die! Fuck this, I'm out of here!
Once done, we can turn off the turret so that it doesn't attack us, and then walk through the hallway to destroy any more Trogs. This leads us to a generator room of sorts. We find 3 steel ingots on the ground here. and a terminal on the wall. This one has lore inside. The first item reads regarding new protectrons. There have been several complaints in the past couple of weeks regarding the new factory protectrons installed throughout the plant. Some of you feel this is the first step in the long process of phasing out the human aspect of the plant. Please be assured that this is not our intention. The new protectrons are here only to protect you, the workers. Also, please remember to carry your ID with you at all times. The protectrons are programmed to make sure those present in the plant are valid employees. Management. In the next one, regarding recent employees, those employees who recently took it upon themselves to incapacitate a protectron with a bucket of water and a sledgehammer have been dealt with and no longer work at the plant. Let this be a reminder to all employees. Those caught harassing and or damaging the factory protectrons will be dealt with swiftly and severely. Sounds like people were really afraid of losing their jobs. And the final one, regarding new shipment, we've ordered 3 new protectrons to be installed immediately in the plant. One will take the place of the recent protectron that was destroyed by our very own employees who, let me remind you, are now ex-employees. The other 2 will take their positions working on the assembly line. So the employees resorted to violence when their jobs were given to robots. And it looks like it didn't solve anything. They just got fired and the company brought in more protectrons. Heading through the door and down the hallway, we can loot some minor loot on a shelving unit here, and then continue across a catwalk in the next room leading to a staircase, which takes us to the ground floor. We see a bunch of Trogs on the ground floor, chewing on something disgusting, but we find a floating pod in the corner. Here we see a pre-war skeleton hanging out of a window, and we can loot some ammunition, fragmentation grenades, and a first aid kit. Here we see a terminal that controls the nearby turret. We can activate the turret to kill these Trogs, or just wait for them to run on up to this pod. We've already got our auto axe ready. Heading downstairs, if we're not careful, we'll trip a tripwire connected to a fragmentation trap in a nearby pipe. Luckily, we got out of the way just in time. Inside one of these carts, we find a whole bunch of human skulls. Since the cart is directly beneath these little pipes, I'm assuming the raiders must use these pipes to dispose of slave remains. This may explain the big pile of bodies we find on the ground, which the Trogs were feeding upon. Heading through the double doors, at the very end, we find a big shelf filled with RADaway, ammunition, and more first aid. And we find an automated maintenance terminal that we can hack. It's got an average lock. And if we do, we can release the nearby maintenance protectron. For more top-of-the-line Robco products, see your local storeroom. We can run the maintenance routine, and if we do, the protectron activates and patrols the area. We find 2 doorways to go down. Going down the right path first, we follow some train tracks past a bunch of these rail cars until we find a gruesome sight. A big pile of Trog bodies lying on top a bunch of dismembered human corpses. Inside one of the rail cars, we find a Pitt slave, and then lying on the ground just beyond it are a whole bunch of dead wild men. The wild men must have been the previous inhabitants of this supply plant. The Trogs must have invaded, killed them all, and then dragged their bodies over here to feast upon. The slave I'm thinking must have been one of the many slaves the raiders sent out to the Steelyard to collect ingots. They killed him and brought him back down here. We also find a big stack of steel ingots. Retracing our steps and then going down the left path, we see a ruined protectron and 3 human skeletons pressed against a locked door. Unlocking the door leads to a maintenance closet where we find 6 steel ingots and a whole bunch of loot on the shelves. 32 caliber ammunition, RADaway, cigarettes, Rad-X, a whole bunch of stuff. There is 1 skeleton on the ground with a 32 caliber pistol on a table next to a terminal. In the terminal, we find all of the company-wide messages that we read earlier and a whole bunch of private entries. I brought it up with management today that the men down at the plant aren't taking the new shipment of robots lightly. They fear losing their jobs, and I don't blame them. It's my job to make sure morale stays high no matter what happens. It's hard to look each man in the eye and tell him that he has nothing to worry about, even though I very well know that he'll be unemployed in less than a month. I don't know how long I can continue to lie to these men. Tom McMullen, supply plant supervisor. So management was lying. They were going to replace all of their human employees with robots. In number 2, I've managed to delay a rather large shipment of Protectrons today. I told management that we've been having problems with the previous batch of robots and are not prepared for another batch anytime soon. This is complete horse crap, of course. The robots work perfectly. They outperform our best workers by a factor of 5. The men continue to lose morale day after day. Some blame me, but they don't understand that this is completely out of my hands. I'm doing everything I can to help these men keep their jobs. In the next one, management made a surprise visit to the plant today. I guess they stopped believing what I've been telling them about the robots not performing to standards. They saw firsthand the speed and efficiency of the robots. Unfortunately, they also caught 2 employees in the act of tearing apart a Protectron and smashing it with a sledgehammer. I was to blame, of course. The men are starting to believe I'm working closely with the managers and helping them in every way possible to save my own skin. Oh, this poor guy. Sounds like Tom was caught in the middle. In the next one, news broke out today over the loudspeakers that everyone needs to vacate the plant by 1 p.m. Due to budget cuts, this plant is shutting down. The men knew at once there was no budget cut. They ultimately decided I was to blame, having seniority in this section of the plant. As soon as I heard the news, I grabbed my pistol and made for the exit. It was quickly barricaded. I turned around and ran to this utility closet and locked the door behind me. I'll stay in here until the men go home. In the next one, the men won't leave. They're determined to wait until I come out. Probably going to give me one hell of a beating, that I'm sure of. I wish they understood how hard I worked for them, how I used every opportunity to delay the inevitable. They better get going, though. It's almost 1 p.m. The robots will be here in half an hour. Sooner, if management hears of what's happening. In the final entry, I begged them to leave before the robots got here. They laughed and said they'd take care of the robots. It's me they wanted. Then came the familiar rattle of a Protectron. That got their attention. I soon heard laughter, cursing, and screaming down the hall. I opened the door and stepped outside. A couple of the workers burst around the corner screaming for help. A red laser lashed out from down the hall and severed Tim's right arm in 2. I panicked and ran back into the closet and shut the door. The men slammed into the door and begged me to open it. I didn't say a word, just sat, stunned, listening to their screams of agony as the robot finished them off one by one. Then, silence. I put my ear to the door and listened. I heard the clanking of Protectron feet down the hall. I grabbed my pistol and backed away from the door. No way am I opening this door for anyone or anything. Whoever reads this, let it be known. I did everything in my power to keep everyone's job at the plant. And let this be an example of how not to replace humans with machines. Tom must have committed suicide with his pistol, or died to starvation. We find his body here by the terminal. These skeletons outside the door must be those of Tim and the other workers who, at one point, were banging on the door asking for Tom's blood until the Protectron came, and then they wanted his help. This is where the Protectron dashed them to bits. You know, hearing this story, I don't walk away learning a lesson about why you shouldn't replace people with machines. After all, Tom himself showed us that these machines were outperforming human labor in every way. The riot that these men took part of is another shining example of why the management had a good reason to choose machines over humans. The machines can't rebel, the machines can't riot. If we look at just the data, management clearly made the right decision. Using the robots was cheaper, produced better work, and reduced the risk of violence. I understand how horrible it is to lose a job, and I can empathize with Tom for trying to help out these men, but ultimately the men didn't care. They still blamed Tom. Tom still died in this closet after everything he did to try to help them. In situations like these, when technological progress makes certain jobs obsolete, I don't believe the correct response is to stick to one's guns, or to drag one's feet, or to sabotage, so that one can cling to what he has, to what he's known, to avoid change. Perhaps the best solution is try to adapt to that change, to make oneself useful in the new world he finds himself in. People who can are the people who survive. As we continued along, we reached the final room in this supply plant, and it's swarming with more Trogs. This auto axe sure is a whole lot of fun, but the Trogs can still get so close. I lost a lot of limbs while trying to kill these guys. On the eastern end of the room, we find a terminal, but it has all of the same terminal entries that we read previously. Looks like before the Trogs overwhelmed this area, either the raiders or the wildmen had turned this into a home. We find beer and iguana bits, food stacked up, chems on the ground. They had set up a pitching machine, and we see baseball bases going all the way around this big gap in the middle of the floor. Looks like they had set up a baseball diamond to play baseball when they got bored. Against the western wall, we find a small crate filled with flamer fuel, the decapitated remains of a wild man, and on the bed, the unique auto axe man opener. The man opener is one of 2 unique auto axes in the game, and it's unique because it ignores normal damage resistance, similar to a Deathclaw gauntlet. Otherwise, it has the same damage and therefore DPS of a traditional auto axe, with its ability to ignore enemy damage resistance being its only unique feature. We find a steel ingot on top of the writing desk next to the bed, and activating the switch near the bed turns on the pitching machine. Now that we know this, if we take a look at the position of the dead wild man, it may be that the wild man accidentally killed himself. The balls went right over his head. To leave, we go to the southeastern corner where we find a door. Heading down the hallway, we can kill one more Trog, which leads to a locked door. To activate it, we click the switch next to the door, which brings us right back out to the entrance. We can go back to the Steelyard by going through the door. We can then try and go and explore the power plant. We see painted directions pointing to it all over the place, and we find the sewer entrance to the north, but if we try to access it, we can't enter it yet. This unlocks later in the story. With that, we finish exploring the Steelyard. We can head back towards the mill and open the door. We see that the foreman is gone. He's probably back inside the mill. We can explore this small little area where we kill a few more Trogs, and we find 3 more steel ingots in one of these little rail cars. When done, we can leave back to the mill through the door. When we do, the foreman Everett approaches us.
Well now, look who made it back. I'll take those ingots, Scab. You just get back in there and get about your business. You got a real knack for this. Here, this might help you work a little harder. Original owner can't use it anymore on account of decapitation.
Here you go, here are a few ingots.
More metal for the mill.
Hey, you got anything for me?
Guess I could spare this.
If we have found all 100 ingots, we can only hand them in 10 at a time. Each time we do, he gives us a new weapon or piece of armor. I'll be going over all of the stuff we can get from Everett in my final video in this series. Once done, we need to go find Millie and tell her the sad news about Wild Bill. As we head out of the mill and back to downtown, we find a slave trying to run for his freedom. He's chased down by a pit raider and executed. Heading back and rounding the corner, we find Millie.
Any luck finding Wild Bill?
Yeah, I found him in the Steelyard.
Oh, that's wonderful. Where is he now? Did he come back with you?
We can lie to her and say, Bill said to let you know he's okay, but he can't come back anytime soon.
As long as I know he's okay, then that's all that matters. Thank you for your help. I'll tell the others that Bill is all right. Here, take these stim packs. They're all I have. Goodbye.
If we do, she gives us 6 stim packs. And interestingly enough, we don't lose karma for lying. Or we can tell her the truth, but do it in a horrible way. We can say, I heard Bill's blood-curdling screams and I knew I was too late.
Oh, no!
I saw multiple Trogs clawing, tearing, chewing on his limbs.
That's horrible. Poor Bill.
I scared off the Trogs and ran to Bill. He was still alive.
Bill, he was alive?
Barely. He was calling for you, but I had to put him out of his misery.
Please stop. I can't hear any more of it. I don't feel so well.
He was one tough bastard. Took every shot of my pistol.
I think I'm going to faint. Please stop it.
And one large concrete block to the head.
I don't feel... I'm going to...
With that, the poor girl faints. Now, if at any point while telling our horribly cruel lie, we tell her that we're just kidding, or if at the very beginning we say, Bill's dead, I found his body in the Steelyard. I'm sorry, Millie, we get the same response.
He's dead? But he promised us he would come back. I have to let the others know. Thank you for your help. Here, take these stim packs. They're all I have. Goodbye.
And we still get 6 stim packs. There's also one more interesting thing about Millie. She's a bit of a kleptomaniac. We don't learn this through any part of the game, but instead we find it in the Fallout 3 official strategy guide. She steals chems, food, and other stuff and hides them in tricky places around downtown. Her stashes include a broken TV set, a ventilation conduit, a broken fire hydrant, and an engine block. Finding each of these is a great way to stock up on chems before we head out to the Steelyard. Now all we have left to do is return to Medea to learn about our next task, which we will do in tomorrow's episode. If you want to make sure that you don't miss tomorrow's episode, be sure to subscribe and to click that bell notification button. I publish a new Fallout video 6 days a week, and this week we're focusing on the Pitt DLC for Fallout 3 with a new episode every day this week. If you like what I do and you want to support me in a more personal way, consider becoming one of my patrons on Patreon. But more importantly, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you bright and early tomorrow morning with episode 4.